Or maybe someone will come and nuke the whole world. We don't know.
I mean, honestly, Elon Musk probably could. I don't doubt that. He's like, guys, I want you guys all to move to Mars now. So,
okay, guys.
And, if you guys don't get out of here in like the next 60 minutes, I'm sorry, but you're donezo.
Guys,
come
get
to
on my
new,
ship.
New pad.
We're going to Mars. Mm-hmm. If not, fine, I'll send off the nukes. Okay. I like that in this reality, Elon Musk has access to all the nukes.
Honestly, that guy has access to a lot of stuff. So, I don't...
Hello everybody, and welcome back to Chai Chatter. On today's menu, we'll be discussing Philosophical Questions, Part 2, Humanity Edition, with a side of various warm beverages. What do you guys have?
I've got some orange pico tea for the caffeine.
I have coffee again.
Coffee again?
Strike two for me.
Diana, strike two. Oh.
Our exclusively tea podcast.
It's some thin ice right there. I have David's Tea Forever Nut.
Classic.
A true classic. So, on today's episode, we are talking a lot more about, what makes us human and that sort of thing. So let's start with one of the more, common questions that people ask of, are people inherently good or bad?
I would say, you have to examine what is inherent goodness and badness, which,
Well, I mean, we kind of talked about it last time, and, whether or not, being good or bad is relative, but I think also it kind of depends upon how you would define a person, especially as being good or bad. Not an act in specific, because, how would you define a person? Is it their thoughts? Is it their actions? That kind of thing. And for me personally, I think that it's more so your actions which define you as a person. So I guess my answer to the question, are people good or bad inherently, is they aren't. People just tend to do good and bad things. Yeah, and then, of course, if you do more, and I guess it's kind of hard to decide whether or not a thing is good or bad, because, if you have good intentions, but you do something bad, is it good? So, yeah, I guess it's sort of hard to tell, but generally what I would say is that there's no one who's born evil, there's no one who's born good. We just sort of do good and bad things, and sometimes we tend to do more bad things than good things, or good things than bad things, and then that's sort of how other people can be like, oh, that's a bad person or that's a good person. But of course, obviously, the nuance comes in when you have to decide what is a good action and what is a bad action, what's a good thought, what's a bad thought.
So, how you brought up that point where you can have good intentions but end up doing a, quote, bad thing, right? So, throughout a lot of history and a lot of, movies that we see, the villain never really thinks of themselves as the bad guy. In most cases, the villain is the hero of their own story. So in that sort of case, do we examine somebody's intentions or do we examine somebody's actions? And you say that we should examine the end result.
Not necessarily, because then there brings in the whole question of, do the ends justify the means.
Or what if the reverse happened where somebody had bad intent, but, somehow they fumbled and they ended up doing a good thing. A cartoonish villain wanted to destroy the city, but in the end he ended up, curing a disease. Do we give that person credit?
Yeah, I think the thing is, the reason why it's so hard to sort of make one big sort of judgment of what you should judge good and bad by is because it varies so much from situation to situation. So I'm not just gonna claim that, if you always have good intentions, then it's always going to be a good act or whatever, because I don't know, it could change.
Humans are complex creatures. When you're saying, is it good or bad, you can't just narrow it down to one fact. It's a whole confusing mess of things, and even when someone does something and you have all the information, you and someone else might have a different opinion on if it's good or bad, just because that's how humans are. We have varying opinions about everything.
So I think that, again, I'm not sure what is good or bad, but the only thing that I am sure of is I think that, it's no one is born bad, no one is born good, because, and I think that's important to tell people, because if people are convinced that they're born bad, they're gonna live their entire lives, with this sort of shame hanging on them and self-hatred. And if you tell someone that they're born good, of course, sometimes they'll be a little careless and they'll think that their actions don't have consequences.
What about, so not whether we think of ourselves as being born good or bad, but how functionally in society we enforce this through like justice. This definition of good or bad, who decides that spectrum in society? And should people have the right to decide that spectrum? Because obviously we can't have a functioning society without clear laws stating this is good and this is bad and this is what happens if you do this. You know, because we talked about how everybody will have a different perspective. So in the end, who has the right to decide?
Well, that's sort of something that is partially already considered in things. Obviously not quite to the extent where philosophy would go. But like, there's a reason why there's juries and that sort of a thing, and there's a reason why there are defenses such as, like, the insanity plea and that sort of thing, where there are excuses to be like, oh, well, but this was because of this, therefore a lesser sentence could be applied. There are those ways to adjust to that, but then, yeah, that brings back to the question of, how do you decide when lesser sentences should be allowed? It's very relative. You could have one jury that would say one thing, one that would say another thing. It's hard to be certain about anything.
So you guys have heard of like retributive justice and reformative justice, right?
Yeah.
Reformative justice, yes.
Basically, if we were to like break it down, at least I'm paraphrasing what I think it is, which is retributive justice is punishment. You know, let the punishment fit the crime. If somebody does something bad, they will get what they deserve. Yeah, exactly. Whereas reformative justice is kind of the rehabilitation piece. So once somebody has served their time, you put them through counseling, you figure out the root of why they did what they did, and you try to rehabilitate them back into society, and you seek kind of like a forgiveness / conversation discussion with the victim, and it's like a form of healing rather than, so if we're talking about, whether people are inherently good or bad, I feel like that fits a lot into this debate. For you two, if you were to create a society, right, which kind of model would you go with?
I think that reformative justice seems like the ideal option in most cases, and that's where it gets fuzzy, because there are some people who won't change. And there are a lot of people who will. And reformative justice is something that should be in effect, but then there also is still the risk that it won't work. Like, you have to see both sides. Yeah. You can't just be like, this is the ideal. The ideal would be that everyone reforms and then comes back and becomes a better person. But you can't guarantee that happens. So I think it's something that I don't know enough to be like, this is the definite answer, but I want to say that in most cases, reformative justice would be preferable rather than just punishing someone and then making them go deeper into that hole of, I am a criminal.
Like, the way I see it, if somebody murders someone and they're put in jail, the purpose should not be to punish them for what they did, but it's more so just to sort of make sure it doesn't happen again. If a murderer is in prison, that means they're not going to be continuing to murder people, obviously. So I guess that's more so like reformative, and obviously if once they're in jail, away from society and away from murdering people, hopefully they can sort of, maybe like take counseling or something and then learn, killing people bad, not killing people good. Yeah. But of course, that's a best case scenario.
Okay. Well, I think it's a lot clearer to say on the extreme ends of the spectrum. For example, you say somebody who murdered someone, right? It would be pretty easy to say, yeah, we're not going to let that guy out and try to give them counseling, It's pretty easy to make that choice. Or, somebody steals a loaf of bread, like Jean Valjean. Then it would be easy to say, don't lock them up for 20 years. Just, provide them with some food, because clearly, that's because of their economic situation. But then, like, there are crimes that exist right in the middle, on the brink. Is that type of situation that is, it's really hard to make the call, right? If you had talked to, say, the family of the victim or something like that, and they were super emotional and they wanted to see this criminal punished, do you think that would be worth it?
Well, I don't think that would help them in the long run.
Oh, okay. And why do you think that is?
Like, how that's not going to make them feel any better to see someone who hurt their family also hurt. Like, obviously that, like, it's sort of that question of like revenge versus justice, and that's sort of like revenge. Like it's punishing this person is not going to bring their dead family member back. See, also what you're saying about how there's sort of these extremes of like, oh, like super bad criminal and then sort of like small kind of like
petty theft,
victimless crime. There's also sort of, you know, those layers to like the, not punishment, but sort of like jail system, I don't know, or treatment or whatever, because if someone is sort of committed like a mid-level crime, the only two options aren't just like punishment, like whip them and, I don't know, electrocute them for what they did, and then take them out of jail completely and, you know, try to have them talk to a therapist. Like, you know, there's places in the middle, like obviously keep them in jail where they can't hurt anyone else, but at the same time have them sort of talk to a therapist, you know?
That all makes sense. Yeah, it should be on a scale of how much harm justice system believes that you may have the ability to cause if you were to be released then. Based off of that, then you could figure out a plan to then work through whatever. Like maybe it does mean staying in jail for still a long period of time, but it could be with support to try and make it possible to be released at some point.
But the goal should always be, I think, I mean, obviously I don't know that much about the justice system, but the goal should always be to help people, not...
Yeah. For me, my overall answer to are people inherently good or bad is that I think, like, the truth is people are inherently gray. Everyone's always in that little gray area between. There's no one who is inherently good. There's no one who's inherently bad. Even if someone were inherently good or bad, not everyone would see it that way. So I think everyone's just trapped in the gray area.
But for me, it's a complete free-for-all. It's complete chaos. As in, I really don't think that there ever will be an objective definition of good or bad, because I view humans as very much like, you know, animalistic creatures, and the only reason why we even have labels such as good or bad is because we exist in a society with other people. Because, you know, if there was only one human on Earth, there really would be no morality, right? Morality is relative to the people that it affects. I don't even know if I would say people are gray, as in they have a bit of both, but that they're completely like blank, colorless, you know, until you give them a color, depending on what time era you were born, or where you were born, or how you were born.
I mean, I'm not sure if I can entirely agree with that. Without other people, morality wouldn't be important, because think about, like, people who self-sabotage. They feel bad about that. They know their actions are bad, but the only person affects it, or directly affects, is themselves. I feel like there is still good and bad involved, even if you're the only person.
Oh, I sort of meant as, like, you literally imagine that there's only one person left alive on Earth. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, not even that, because, you know, you can still do bad things, just not to other people, you know? You can, like, stomp on a plant, and then some person who's living alone is like, oh, that plant died, am I a bad person?
Yeah.
I guess you'd have to take plants out of the picture, and then...
Wait, wait, this is getting into that territory where we're gonna debate, okay? So...
I think that, like, even if you were alone, I think it's almost, like, now ingrained in society to, like, feel those,
but
that's
there
good,
is
that's
no
bad.
Society.
So I
no, but you would make it.
But now, if we're talking about with people now suddenly, poof, you're the only person, there's no plants or anything, you'll still find a way to be like, I can't believe I did that. That's so awful of me. I'm such a bad person.
Okay, but it's a thought experiment. Imagine this, right? You are the first human there ever was. Like, and there are no other life forms like you. Okay, but then if you believe in evolution, when does that start? Okay, you gotta let go of reality. This is a thought experiment. Just gotta imagine you are the only human that there ever was, there ever will be. You have no concept of society or other humans. You're just you. You're an animal. You're living in this jungle with probably mostly plants, you know, no other animals with enough intelligence to judge you, okay?
Yeah.
In that sense, there is no morality.
Glenda, when I'm thinking about your thought experiment, and I'm thinking about it from, like, ignoring all the other details, like, evolution or whatever, just, like, existing within the thought experiment, even though I think that people would, as long as there are consequences for people's actions, I think that even if they were an isolated person in an isolated society, they would start to create their own idea of good and bad. Because again, what I said about the plant, you know, even if there's no other people, they step on a plant and they realize that whenever they eat a plant or they step on it, it dies. Obviously, they're going to start having ideas like, did I do something good? Did I do something bad? And then those ideas start to create, because that's of course how we started creating these ideas of good and bad in the first place, you know? Even if you take away all other people, there's still going to be a system that exists.
Yeah, I exactly agree with that. That's the sort of thing where
That's a good point. Yeah.
even if, let's say though, this supposed human that had no contact with other humans is the first human, only human, if they were not to have that thought process and, like, go through that and then start to, like, see things they do as good or bad, then I wonder if that could even be considered the same as a human that we picture them as today, or if it would slowly branch off into being another species. Because when you think about it, how creatures evolve is sort of, they do something, that's not good, don't do that anymore, and then they survive from not doing, like, you know, there is still that, that's a bad thing to do, that's a good thing to do, and then doing those bad things might then get the idea of that's a bad action, and then morality once again starts again.
Yeah.
I guess the real question would be, if you could create a world without consequences, you know, then you might have a world where there would be no morality.
Chantal, I love your point, because, you know, me and Diana are in biology right now, and we're talking about things like natural selection, where if you don't define it as necessarily good or bad in the sense of morality, but beneficial to survival or not beneficial to survival, then evolution absolutely has a kind of quote-unquote morality to it. So maybe instead of defining morality as this, like, ooh, like, holier than thou type of thing, it's literally the same thing as evolution, where we have these ideas throughout history, we get rid of the ones that are bad and don't work, and we keep the ones that, and maybe some of that ties into human survival, some of it ties into, like, happiness, some of it ties into the way society best works. If we're gonna be talking about morality and humanity itself, we should probably examine what we believe to be the self, or, like, the essence of the self.
Okay, so what I'd say you need to be yourself is, number one, I think we're all going to agree with this, your memories, because obviously your experiences shape who you are tremendously. Then second, I would say your environment. And by environment, I mean literally anything that would influence you. So, like, your friends, your family, whatever, like, media you're consuming, just, like, maybe even, like, the area of town you live in, all of these things, like, can, like, influence who you are. Finally, I would say, like, genetics, you know, like, the traits that you actually inherit from your parents. And this might be, like, an area of sort of, like, debate. I'm not really sure, because I do think that, like, your physical, maybe, appearances do actually make up a part of your identity, because depending on, like, how you look, you might have certain views. Like, for example, if you have, like, a trait that you don't really like about yourself, obviously you're going to be more of a self-conscious person, you know? So yeah, I do think that a person's, like, genetics and appearances do sort of affect who they are as a person.
Okay, so my one question is, up until this point, a lot about you has changed except for these three things. I would ask you why the environment part is necessary, because if you think about it, a person's memories is pretty much the accumulation of their experiences in that environment up until that certain point.
Right?
But I mean, like,
so moving forward.
Still need...
Because, like, if we're talking about, like, you would have a clone of yourself created and you wanted them to be, like, the exact same person as you, of course you would need, like, the past, you would need all of your memories, but moving forward, for them to be the same person as you, they'd need to keep on creating those memories, you know? They need to progress in a natural way that you would.
Diana's looking at the very, like, a very dynamic way, for if it was going to keep on going, but you took away things, what would you need to remain? I was thinking a more static. If you were to pause time and pull apart everything except what made you you, I would say a lot of people jump in there like the brain. The brain's what makes you you. But that's just an organ. What it really is those neural pathways and the, like, neural memory of how to fire them for your memories, for your actions, and that sort of thing. So it really is just those neurons inside your brain and the network that they've created.
The reason why I chose to kind of look at it as sort of like a dynamic thing is because, I don't know, like, when I think about myself, I really can't think about, like, a moment in time where I felt the most myself, you know? Like, I'm constantly changing, you know? There's never, like, a solid, like, me. You can't just, like, take a snapshot of me and then there's all that I am right there in that picture, you know?
Thinking of math analogies right now, which is so cringy.
I'm out.
In calculus, you have a graph, and it's a squiggly little graph that goes across. And if you stop at one point and you, like, make a tangent line, that shows you the rate that it's changing at that exact point. If you go somewhere else, it could be the exact opposite. Like, throughout this, like, segment, it's constantly changing, but that whole time it's still that same graph. It just is constantly changing, like the rate. I'm talking about like derivatives right now, which is but it's constantly changing throughout it, but overall it's still called the same thing. But then you can take the absolute value of that and it'll like just come up with the average between all of that. That average is me, but at all those points where it's entirely different, and there could be like outliers where it's entirely different at points, that's still you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up another nerdy analogy, because I get what you're talking about. With a lot of philosophy, like the more that I look at math, the more I find myself relating things to it, which is so nerdy and lame.
It's
but
so
like
gross.
Math is kind of the code for the universe, so maybe. So I think about it as like a video game character. So what you have, the things that make a video game character is the progress that you have saved, so your memories, the inherent coding of the character, so your genetics, and then the kind of game environment itself, which is the world that this character can traverse through and interact with, which makes that character the character. If we were kind of to be more, spiritual and floaty, do you guys believe in things such as souls, spirits, essences, anything like that?
Those are not physical things. They are not like a tangible, like, this is my soul. My soul is who I am. I think it's more just like, it's a way to describe part of you. Like, it's like, my soul is like compassionate. That's more just a way to describe how you are as a person. It's another, like, it's not a tangible, real thing.
When I describe myself, I don't really feel like myself having a soul, but I also don't feel like I can like discredit anyone else for feeling that we do, just because I don't have that sort of knowledge,
When we were talking about free will in the last version of this episode, we kind of had that little like trim sort of between like viewing life in the way that people who believe in souls do, which is, there's meaning behind everything. There's this kind of like spirituality to it, or the very cut and dry, you have no free will. Are we saying that for this specific topic in philosophy, we're kind of like the more cut and dry?
What I find kind of interesting actually about those two sort of like thought processes, like the super scientific chain of cause and effect, everything is fixed on this micro level, and then this sort of more spiritual idea of, there being fate, and then there's these sort of like predetermined sort of paths for you to take. Even though they seem sort of polar opposite, of course there's a lot of like, they're actually pretty intertwined and they can sort of coexist with each other, because they both are kind of based on this idea that, that your future is already fixed,
Right.
They just sort of have different ideas of how you get there,
Like, they make you think less of yourself and more of the universe, and like feel less significant. That is quite
so there you go, spiritual people and scientific people, we can coexist.
Getting into the more practical application of this kind of debate, which is like kind of something that is already knocking on our door, which is genetic modification. Have you guys heard of CRISPR?
Oh yeah.
Right?
I'm not sure if I have. Can you give me a little refresher?
Okay, so CRISPR, again, I'm trying to paraphrase from what I remember. I read up on it like a while ago, but it's basically this new kind of gene editing technology that allows them to kind of go into your DNA sequences and like with scissors just kind of cut, edit, and paste. At least that's the general idea. So it's like the most advanced form of gene editing technology that we have right now. Through gene editing, there's a bunch of different things: clones, designer babies. Instead of natural selection happening, it'll be humans, deciding things,
which is
playing
basically
God.
Eugenics at that point.
Basically eugenics. But also, some people would think of it as taking control of our own existence. So what do you think about just gene editing in general? Editing a germline, that will affect several generations.
Well, I've always found it very interesting. Like, I did a literal presentation in like 8th grade on CRISPR, but I find it interesting in like a pretty like superhuman, like science fiction-y way. Like, when you actually start thinking of like the logistics of it and stuff, obviously I'm a bit more like, is this good? Yes or no? Because obviously, it's great because you would be able to cure all of these sort of, genetic diseases and stuff. But then also, of course, there's the whole question of like, like tailoring people to like be a certain way and just like not having variation, and I don't know, just
so yeah, what you mentioned about sort of designer babies, basically, like, instead of letting natural selection happen, which, you can call a pretty impartial process, I feel like humanity has hit the point where our rate of survival kind of has cheated the system. We've become advanced enough where eventually we will be playing God. Whether racism or any type of bias can affect the entire species when you start messing with things like genes, right? Maybe a racist ideology will make people generally have lighter skin, or favor, blue eyes over brown eyes, or anything like that. Just having those partial beliefs affect generations to come. Deafness, for example, right? People who are deaf would say, I'm not living with a disease. This is not a problem. I'm just a person who happens to be deaf. Would we try to fix that?
I think the thing is, it is very much a personal thing on where people sit on their own. Because especially with stuff like deafness, where there's a big community around it, there's sign language and that sort of stuff, there's whole world of community that they've built. That would be a whole part of culture that could be lost by getting rid of that. And some people see it as, well, this has led me to where I am, so I think of being deaf as a blessing that I have. Even like with things like diseases that generally seen as awful, there might be people who are like, well, but if this is how it's supposed to be, that's how it's supposed to be. There's going to be people no matter what who are going to reject it. So it should be up to, the specific family themselves to decide where exactly they want to sit on this issue, and then from there make the decision.
So do you think that technology for this in general should be developed to fix anything and leave it up to the parents, basically? The other thing is, if it's germline editing, you editing this baby's genes is not just going to affect its life, but every subsequent generation that comes afterward. So it's that kind of moral question where you don't just play God with your child, you play God with every future generation that comes after. It would be very easy for certain traits that are not favored to just go extinct.
If this technology exists, it's not in my hands to decide what happens with it. I think if it's continued to be developed, which it probably will be because there's already the seeds starting of it, I think regardless, it's going to be developed to the point where if it's possible and it works, because there's going to be someone who believes that this thing should be able to be cured this way, and then it'll be worked towards that. So I think regardless, all the options will be created.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about like medical stuff, so I think that generally, but what I do sort of believe is that if they're going to start like implementing like CRISPR and other sort of like genetic editing into like medicine and stuff, they need to, I guess, start small, because if maybe like curing diseases and stuff, that could be like, obviously that's a good thing, but when it comes to like other stuff, as in like beautifying, I guess, sort of like using it to do sort of like plastic surgery, that's kind of, maybe they should hold back on that. Just hold back on that.
That's very frowned upon.
Until they find more, once they kind of play around with it a lot more. Because right now I believe they haven't actually tested it on any humans yet. I believe it's only like rats and stuff.
It's pretty easy to decide when it comes to like the two ends of the spectrum, which is treating diseases that kill millions of people a year, and then giving your baby
a nose job,
green eye, a nose job, one green eye and one blue eye just to be quirky. Like the stuff that exists right in the middle of those two, which is treating quote-unquote defects that don't affect the safety of the person with the condition, but also is not quote-unquote favored by society, like certain impairments and stuff like that, where it really gets, people of the community would say, we don't think of this as a defect, and the thing that I feel like is pretty interesting with the way we're talking about this, which is we're basically already assuming that all of this technology will be developed, which is the funny thing, because I know that there are people still debating whether gene editing should be developed, and I feel like that happens with every new technology. Like with the nuclear bomb, there was a lot of debate, why would we even make weapons of mass destruction? We're better than that as a species. But in the end, we ended up making the most powerful weapons and just trying to, so I feel like what will happen with humanity is just assume that everything will be developed Anything that you
that's
can
true.
think of, we
and
will
there's
go there.
if it can be, and there's some possible benefit that someone can think of who has the expertise where they can work on it, they'll work on it. If they see the benefit and it's possible, it's going to be developed. Maybe it won't be functional.
Yeah, laws will try to regulate this type of technology on the black market. There are already people trying to sell like little homemade CRISPR kits. Totally don't work. But there's one interview I saw where a guy was like, you know, what if in the future, like picture a future where instead of giving yourself a tattoo while you're drunk, you just like CRISPR yourself.
I feel like that's not how that works.
I don't think that's how it works. But again, you know, we're talking in the year 2021. You know, in 2080, people could be laughing at us.
Well,
we're
also, we were expected to have
dinosaurs
flying cars a long time ago, and
that's true.
this is going to take a long time to reach the ability to...
Not even the science or the tech itself, but like morality and society takes a really long time to catch up to tech.
My main sort of just like, I don't know, thought about it is, sounds cool, it could help a lot of people, it could cure cancer, but also it's very scary when you sort of think about it and all the different things that could happen with it too.
Regardless of the outcome of it or how it's used or anything, humans are terrified of change. So no matter what it's used for, how it gets developed, as long as it exists to any capacity at all, there are going to be people who are going to be against it. And that's true with anything, really.
Yeah.
We are creatures who hate change. So then having something new that comes out and it's like, we can rewrite this part of biology. That is terrifying, because that is a huge change.
So you mentioned like we have the potential to rewrite biology itself, right? So this gets into like probably the biggest philosophical debate about this kind of technology, which is humans playing gods. Do you think that there's some inherent beauty in the way that nature works, that we should let that take its course and not try to get too full of ourselves? Or should we go there, basically?
I think there's a big difference between will we and should we. Should we? No. Humans are not very good at making good decisions, like, for the long term. Should we? Probably not. No. Will some people? Yes. I'm almost certain that if it's a possibility, someone will.
I think that it's very easy to sort of just look at it and say, no, we should not do this. Because, look, we're like 3 high school students and we've already came up with, like, multiple reasons why it's a bad idea to do this, but also like when you're in the moment and you have like a family member, someone who's very close to you who has like cancer or another like disease, and you have the ability in your hands to like let them live, like what are you going to do, right? It's very hard to say.
So we are about to wrap up this episode now. We actually have a lot more things to say on many different topics, so I think we're going to end up doing a philosophical questions part 3, where we discuss a bunch of sci-fi tropes. But thank you so much for listening to us get deep while the tea steeps, and joining us on this episode. If you have any suggestions that you would like to see or hear from us, please leave that in the comments down below, and cheers!